I lied, and no one ever knew it was to save him. But some nights I still hear my name, spoken by a man who never touched me. My name is Eleanor May Santiago. I'm 80 years old and I live alone in an old trailer deep in the Alabama woods, surrounded by trees that learned to respect my silence. For 6 decades, I kept an iron cross hidden in a sewing box, along with a stained note and a name I never dared speak aloud again. I was a nurse in a war that wasn't mine, a woman in a time that didn't see me, and a lover of a silence that devoured me whole. They say heroines get medals. I only have memories, and today, before time takes me, I've decided to tell everything. Sit here with me, sweetheart. Take a deep breath. This story isn't easy to tell. It's been folded up for more than 60 years, tucked between a hidden necklace and a name I never had the right to say out loud. But today, if you'll let me, I want to show you a piece of what's lived inside me all this time. Listen with an open heart, because maybe you're carrying something like this too, even if you don't realize it. If this story touches you in any way, if some part of it echoes in your silence, I gently ask, subscribe to the channel, leave a heart on this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear a truth time tried to erase. Here, no one is forgotten. I still remember the smell of iron like it's in this room, with me, mixed with the scent of the coffee I just warmed up. Iron and blood, 2 smells you never forget. And the sound of boots. Oh, that sound, like muffled thunder on wet ground. It scared me at first, but then it became a song of arrival, a whispered omen in worn leather. It was 1944 when I saw him for the first time. He walked in limping, the weight of the world on his shoulders and a nasty gash on his right calf. He must have been 25, maybe younger. But his eyes held centuries, blue like the sky after a storm, but with a stillness only someone who'd seen hell could carry. I was changing the bandages on another young man, trying to hide the shake in my hands. Not out of fear, but exhaustion. And also because of, well, something I didn't yet know how to name. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I just held out my hand, showed him the cot, and waited for him to sit. I remember the metal creaking when he lay down. I remember how I held my breath so I wouldn't seem affected. But my heart jumped like a startled child. It wasn't love yet. Just a long pause. A suspended moment between 2 strangers who weren't allowed to touch. He handed me his papers, name, registration number, division, and gave me a small smile. Not the rehearsed smile of a soldier trying to hide pain, but a resigned half-smile, like he was saying, I know you know. And I did. I knew that war took more than lives. It took identities. His name was Isaac J. Mallory, and from that moment on, I could never let it go. Have you ever felt truly seen by someone you never met before? It's strange, right? Like some part of your soul stands up in a crowd and says, "It's me, it's me." That's how I felt that day. Like my spirit rose before I did, in a hurry to find his. Isaac didn't talk much, mumbled something about grenades and mud, then went quiet. But his eyes spoke so much. Sometimes I felt small under their weight. He clenched his fists, maybe from pain, maybe from memories too big to fit in his chest. And there I was, trying to remember if I'd ever felt so seen, not judged, just noticed. The other nurses called it war love, like it was a passing fever. They said it was normal to confuse loneliness with desire, that it was just fear chemistry. But what grew between me and Isaac wasn't desire. It was waiting, a silent waiting. The kind of forbidden love no one dares name, because naming means commitment, and commitment means loss, and I'd already lost too much. My homeland, my brothers, my accent-heavy tongue. I couldn't bear to lose something I hadn't even had. Isaac came back many times after that. Sometimes with small wounds, sometimes just asking for an extra painkiller, but always with that same silence between us. And that look that said, "I see you." That was everything to me. In a time when black or mixed-race nurses like me weren't even called Miss, he called me with his eyes, and that was enough to make me feel human. There were nights I could barely sleep. I'd lie awake, listening to the sounds in the tent, muffled coughs, hidden sobs, whispered prayers. But the sound that echoed most in me was the rhythm of his footsteps. When he walked in, even without saying a word, my body found its rhythm, a steady beat, like the whole world realigned around this limping man. One time, while I was cleaning instruments, he walked behind me and whispered, "You don't seem scared." I smiled but didn't turn. I just said, "Fear knows where to hide, soldier." And he paused for a second, like my words hit deeper than shrapnel. Then he walked away. I wasn't brave. I never was. I was just trained not to show what hurt. And back then, what hurt most was silent love. That kind of love no one explains. A love that doesn't show, doesn't write itself, doesn't live, only lingers, like an invisible cross. I noticed one day that he always wore the same shirt under his uniform, faded, frayed at the collar, and around his neck, a small dark iron crucifix. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help it, because every part of him reminded me of something I'd never have. And still, I wanted to see, even just to remember. He didn't know my full name, and I never asked for his. We only knew what we needed to. Like two deserters of affection, we knew the more we knew, the harder it would be to let go. And in the middle of a war zone, wanting something, that was the biggest risk of all. Bigger than the bombs, because a bomb can kill you. But war love, that can leave you too alive in a world that only knows how to bury feelings. You know, darling, telling this story now, after so many years, isn't about longing. It's about bearing witness. It's about saying that not every emotional story has a happy ending. And that's okay. Some stories exist to remind us we were here, even if no one saw. And sometimes the most beautiful part of forbidden love is the silence it demands. I can still hear the sound of his boots. I don't know if it's memory or something my longing made up. But when the rain hits hard on the window, I swear that rhythm returns and keeps me company. The sound of boots, the smell of iron, and the calm eyes of Isaac J. Mallory. Now, you ask me if I'd do things differently. I don't know. All I know is that on that day, in that tent, something inside me woke up, and it never slept the same way again. War has a strange way of keeping secrets. It hides them in the most unexpected places, in the eyes of those who survive, in letters that never arrive, in the pockets of blood-soaked uniforms. And it was in one of those pockets, soaked, stained, and forgotten, that I found the note. It was late afternoon. The light slipped softly through the tent flap, turning everything gold, like time itself wanted to stop right there. We were organizing the wounded for relocation. Isaac had rushed out, leaving his coat on one of the cots, and I, following protocol, needed to clean his belongings before returning them to the battalion. When I reached into the side pocket, I felt the damp touch of folded paper, worn thin from being opened and closed too many times before. I had to take a deep breath before opening it. Not because I expected anything important, but because touching something that had been close to his chest carried a kind of weight, the weight of crossing a line you can't uncross. I unfolded it slowly, Just 3 lines, scribbled in haste and with mistakes, like someone who feels too much and thinks too little. It was a letter to his mother. It began like this. Mom, I met someone who doesn't ask questions, but sees beyond the pain. The words stared back at me. I almost dropped the paper. My heart beat so loud, it rang in my ears like an alarm. I read it again and again, trying to make sense of it. Was it about me? Or someone before me? Or no one at all? Just a quiet cry thrown into the wind? But it was about me. It was. Not because he said my name, but because that sentence held a reflection of what we were. A hesitant secret. A wartime love that had no right to exist. An emotional story that maybe couldn't ever be spoken aloud. I tucked the paper away without thinking, folding it again, the same way you protect a wound that's still bleeding. I slipped it into the pocket of my apron, and that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked between the beds, pretending to check pulses. But it was my own that felt out of rhythm. I kept thinking about what it meant, a note so short, yet so cruel. Because now I knew. I knew he saw me. That he felt it too. That he was also on the inside of our silence. But knowing only made the fear worse. War could kill. But what it didn't kill, it divided. It separated. It silenced. Isaac came back the next day like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't read a thing. Like that paper hadn't screamed the name of my soul. And I looked at him like my life depended on hiding how much I now knew. I pretended. Like we learn to pretend so often. I pretended the bandage was more important. That his chart had an error. That the thermometer needed more time. I pretended my skin didn't burn every time he stood too close. The words from the note began to echo inside me like a forbidden refrain. Doesn't ask questions. Sees beyond the pain. Was that really what I did for him? Is that why he kept coming back, even when he didn't need to? Was my silence more comforting than any care I could give? Or was he, like me, just looking for a place to breathe, without the weight of the whole world pressing down? You know, sometimes what goes unsaid weighs more than a confession. That note became a secret between me and God, and with time, between me and no one else. I never told him. I never asked anything. And from then on, every time he looked at me, I saw another layer in his eyes. Like he was waiting for me to say something, but afraid of what he'd hear. I still wonder why I kept the note. Maybe out of selfishness, maybe out of love. Maybe because it was one of the only pieces of proof that what we had was real. I couldn't show it. I couldn't say it. But I could keep it. And keeping something is a form of resistance. A quiet way of saying, I lived this, even if the world never knows. And that, sweetheart, is something only forgotten heroines understand. We who loved in the dark. We who healed others' wounds while hiding our own. We who lived forbidden, loves with the courage of those who knew they'd never get to tell the whole story. Not because they didn't want to, but because the world was too much. I've been called strong so many times, as if strength means staying silent. But no one ever asked what that strength cost me. How many sleepless nights, how many words swallowed, how many letters never written. The truth is, inside that tent, with its smell of ether and despair, I learned to be less woman, more wall. It was the only way to survive. But walls tremble on the inside, too. I kept the note in a little metal box I hid deep in my pack, alongside other small keepsakes from soldiers who never came back, or came back too changed to want to remember. I became the keeper of final words, of breaths no one wanted to hear, of war loves no one dared to preserve. And among that pile of borrowed memories, his note was the one that hurt the most. I still remember the paper. Yellowed, uneven handwriting, smudged ink, and the faint smell of gunpowder. I even remember the warmth in my palm when I hid it, because deep down I knew. I knew that keeping it meant condemning our love to eternal silence. But maybe keeping it was my way of loving. Loving without a name, without a witness, without a touch, just with the courage to remember. And that's why, even now, with wrinkled fingers and fading eyes, I still find myself whispering those words. They stayed with me, frozen in time, like a note never sent, like a love never lived, but never forgotten. No one ever knew, but there were so many nights when I pretended to sleep just so I wouldn't have to explain what I was feeling. I'd sit in that metal chair, head leaning against the thin wall of the tent, eyes barely open, body completely still. But inside, my chest was as much a battlefield as any trench. He always came after the silence, like he waited for the night to hide what daylight wouldn't allow. He said he came to rest from the noise outside, and I pretended not to understand. But I did. I understood every pause, every sigh, every dragged step on the dirt floor. The way he avoided holding my gaze for too long. The way he always lay on the same cot, like that was the only place that accepted him whole. I knew what he was looking for wasn't just physical rest. It was refuge. And me? I was the refuge. It was our unspoken agreement. He'd lie down. I'd sit beside him. And the outside world would vanish for a few hours. Sometimes he'd fall asleep fast, like a worn-out child. Other times it took longer. He'd shift from one side to the other. Murmur names. Dates. Numbers. One night, he whispered, "September 15th. Repeated it like he was trying to hold on to something. Or someone. But it was one night in particular that changed everything. It was pouring rain. The wind made the tent's canvas flap and hiss like a wounded animal. I was there, as always, sitting with my eyes closed. He seemed to be sleeping. Then he murmured something. Low, hoarse. I didn't catch it at first. Thought it was just another fragment of memory. But then clearer, I heard it. It was my name. Just my name. No nickname, no confusion. Just my name. And that, sweetheart, was the most intimate gift anyone's ever given me. I didn't touch him. I didn't move. But my whole body warmed, like I'd just been called back into existence. A name whispered like that in the dark is more than sound. It's a choice. A reminder that you matter. That even in a world full of stray bullets and shouted orders, there's someone out there thinking of you tenderly. But back then, wartime love was dangerous. And forbidden love. That was a sentence. Me, an Afro-Latina woman with sun-kissed skin and mixed blood. I couldn't even imagine being called beloved by a white boy from Alabama. A preacher's son with a crucifix hanging on his chest. That would have been seen as disgrace, sin, betrayal, of country, of faith, of family. And he knew. I knew. That's why when he said my name, even in sleep, I understood I'd never hear it again in daylight. The nights became our only meetings, silent, shadowy, almost invisible. He'd come in, and I'd pretend to sleep. Sometimes he'd look at me. I could feel it. The weight of his eyes on me was like a blanket covering me completely. And still, I didn't open my eyes, because opening them would mean admitting, would mean naming something that could only survive unnamed. Some people think love needs declarations, letters, stolen kisses. But there are kinds of love that only exist in silence, that bloom in absence, that survive in what might have been. And that, my girl, is one of the most common tragedies among forgotten heroines. We love deeply, and stay quiet even deeper, I became a master of small gestures. I'd change his pillowcase before every visit, set aside an extra piece of bread, wrap his bandages with more care, like I was stitching an invisible name into them. He noticed. Never said anything, but he noticed. Sometimes he'd give me that sideways smile, and that was enough to help me make it through another day. One night, during one of those silent visits, he opened his eyes and caught me watching. I didn't look away. We were too tired to keep pretending, and for one moment, we let the masks fall. He looked at me like he saw the end of the war inside me. And I looked at him like I already knew that moment would be all we'd ever have. And after that, I really did fall asleep, with a heavy heart full of a story no one would ever tell. At least, not until now. Today, old and carrying scars no one can see, I sometimes find myself sitting on my porch chair, eyes closed, pretending to sleep again. But not to hide, to remember, to relive. Because on those nights, pretending to sleep, I was more alive than in most of the years that followed. I was wanted without being touched. I was remembered without being called. I was loved in the dark, with the intensity that only fear and courage can conjure together. That wartime love. It didn't end. It didn't die. It didn't turn to dust like so many others. It stayed. Because what isn't fully lived becomes eternal. And his name, even if I no longer say it out loud, still rests at the back of my throat like a prayer without an amen. So if you ever wonder how forbidden loves begin, know that sometimes they're born on canvas cots, under makeshift tents, between one bandage and the next, in the hush of midnight. And they last forever, even if no one knows. Even if the only witness is a woman like me, one of many forgotten heroines, who once pretended to sleep, just to avoid waking from a feeling that had no place in the world. The first time I truly noticed the cross was on a grey afternoon, the kind that can't decide whether to rain or just haunt. He was sitting in a wheelchair after a mission that had gone wrong. His hands were scratched up, there was a purple bruise on his shoulder, and his eyes looked even more hollow than usual. I was kneeling, cleaning his knees with morphine-soaked cotton, when the chain slipped out from under his shirt and dropped onto his chest. A darkened iron pendant, aged by time, hanging on the promise of a faith I never knew was comfort or guilt. He looked at me, and I looked at the cross. It took a few seconds before he gathered it up with trembling fingers and tucked it back under his uniform. But it was too late. I had seen it. I had felt it. It wasn't just an object. It was a code. An invisible boundary. A portable altar between him and the rest of the world. That crucifix said everything the words couldn't. Who he was, where he came from, and just how deeply that forbidden love had to be buried. Later that day, as night fell like a veil over the camp, he came back. But this time he wasn't carrying a wound or a request for rest, just silence across his shoulders, and the cross in his hand. He sat beside me without ceremony, like someone who knows there are no more excuses for showing up. He held out the object like a confession, and said plain and simple, to remind me that sometimes God sends tests that hurt more than bullets. At that moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That was all we could ever offer each other. He gave me his faith, and I gave him my teary eyes in return. I held the cross carefully, like it was made of glass. But I didn't put it around my neck. Not then. I slid it into my sock, pressed close to my skin, like hiding a love letter that was never sent. I stayed there with the cross warm against my ankle, while he walked away. And I thought, what kind of love needs to be hidden between bones and fabric? What kind of emotional story only survives in the dark, tucked under clothing like an old shame? The truth, my dear, is that Loving someone who carries in his chest the certainty that you'll never be accepted by his family is like walking barefoot on gravel. You pretend it doesn't hurt. You smile when they ask. But at night, the souls bleed. And I bled, quietly, because he was a preacher's son, because I was a woman of mixed blood, because the war already kept us at the edge. And wartime love, when it's forbidden, pushes you off the cliff before your time. And he knew that. He knew what it meant to hand me that cross. It wasn't just a gesture of faith. It was a plea for silence, a reminder that, even with what we felt, there was an altar between us, built from tradition, judgment, and ancestral expectations. And on that altar, the sacrifice was love. I don't know if you've ever had to keep something like that. Sleeping with it tied to your skin, hidden from the world and from the man who gave it. But in my fingers I could feel it pulse, like a piece of Isaac's chest had stayed with me. It was too intimate to wear, too painful to return. The other nurses used to talk about him sometimes, said he was too straight, too religious, too shut off. But I knew that behind that silence there was a muffled scream, that this man, with his sweaty cross and tired faith, just wanted to love without having to apologize. But the world wouldn't allow that. Forbidden love wears many masks, but the cruelest one is the kind that makes you feel shame for your tenderness. And that's exactly why so many of us, the forgotten heroines, grow old with short smiles and eyes too full, because we carry not just the wounds of war in our bones, but the wars of love too. For weeks I kept that cross hidden. I touched it every night before sleep. I didn't pray. I was never the praying kind, not the way the book said. My faith was louder than psalms and more rebellious than sermons. But when I touched that cross, I whispered inside, protect him. From me, from the world, from everything that hurts people who love too deeply, without permission. We never spoke of it again. He never asked about the cross. And I never said where it was, because we knew. We knew there was a silent pact stitched between his faith and my fear. And back then, that was all we could have. A secret between us. A reliquary of silence. Even now, after so many years, I still have the cross. I've kept it with the same care one keeps a photo of a child who left. And sometimes I find myself staring at it like I'm talking to it. I ask forgiveness. I ask strength. I ask to be understood. Because loving like that, the way I did, leaves marks that neither time nor God can fully erase. And I learned to live with those marks. They ache when it rains, when I hear old hymns, when I see someone with that same lost look he used to have. But they also remind me that I lived, that I loved, that even without a name, without an altar, without vows, that was the purest love I've ever known. And maybe, just maybe, that cross was the only wedding we ever had. A secret wedding, sealed in silence, and eternal in the heart. It was on an afternoon when the world felt like it was about to fall apart, that love nearly crossed the boundary of silence. I think it was September. Dates had started to lose meaning by then. All I remember is the sky, strange, a color I couldn't tell if it was gray or fear. The field hospital was overflowing, the bombings were getting closer, and there was a smell of overturned earth that seemed to announce the end of everything. Someone yelled that we had to evacuate. The tents were shaking. A flipped truck blocked the exit, and for a moment I thought we wouldn't make it. Patients were being rushed out, and the sound of sirens clashed with soldiers' shouts. I was running back and forth, trying to keep calm, but I felt my soul cracking into small pieces. Chaos is a language you learn the hard way. That's when I saw Isaac. He was next to the infirmary tent, helping carry a wounded man, even while limping. Sweat streamed down his face, and his eyes, usually so calm, now burned with the urgency of someone who's lost too much already. When he saw me, he dropped everything and came toward me. The world was collapsing, but he was only looking at me. The explosion was close. The ground shook violently. Cots flew. The scent of fire filled everything, and I fell. My knees hit the dirt hard, and for a second I thought, this is it. Sound, smoke, and panic. But before I could make sense of anything, I felt his hands on my face, steady, warm, trembling, like they were trying to stop time. And he looked at me with a pain that hurt more than everything else around us. He didn't say a word. He just held me. The world could end. All he needed was to hold me. His face came closer. My heart pounded like never before. And for a fraction of a second, just that, a fraction, I knew he was going to kiss me. But he didn't. The movement stopped just inches from my lips, and stayed there, suspended, trapped between what we could have been and what we were never allowed to be. The kiss didn't happen. But in that space between mouths, between longing and fear, between courage and duty, I felt the most real love I've ever known. It was the most absent touch, and yet the most present moment of my life. A kiss that never was. And because it never was, it stayed. Because sometimes the things that don't happen leave deeper marks than the ones that do. He helped me up, and neither of us said a word. We went back to work, between the shrapnel and the shouted orders, as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had changed. I now carried an invisible kiss on my skin, in my bones, in my soul, and I knew I'd never have another like it. You might not believe it, but that was when I finally understood the kind of love we had. It wasn't just some wartime romance. It was a forbidden love that lived in the shadow of what could never be. A love so full of care, it chose not to touch. So full of respect, it chose not to happen. So full of pain it became sacred in its own absence. After that day we never talked about it, never mentioned the almost kiss, never said a word. But the silence between us held everything. It was like the war had, for a split second, shown us the mirror of who we might have been in another world, and then turned that mirror face down. Some nurses used to talk about soldiers falling in love, proposing in trenches, swearing eternal love between bullets. But me? I was one of the forgotten heroines, the kind with no vows, no rings. Just a heart full of absence that ached more than longing. And that absence became an altar inside me. A hollow space where only he lived, where the kiss we didn't share lived, where, in silence, the memory of almost danced with time. I realized that moment was more than a spark. It was a choice, one of the hardest we ever made. To not touch, to not cross the line, to not steal from each other what could only exist in imagination. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of dignity, maybe because we knew that if we lived that love, we'd be sealing our own end. And I chose to love in silence, rather than lose everything in the noise. I chose to hold on to the gesture undone, instead of living the ruin of what might follow. People often ask me if I regret it, if I would have done it differently. And I always smile a little, like he used to, and change the subject. Because there are pains you learn to love. And the kiss we didn't give each other, that was one of them. A lifelong reminder that not every love needs to be lived to be eternal. Some are eternal precisely because they never got broken by reality. Today, when I close my eyes and feel the wind brush my face, I swear I still feel the warmth of his hand, his thumb on my cheek, his breath held, the world trembling around us, and that almost, still hanging in my life like a star that never fell. That's why, out of all the memories I carry, this might be the most vivid, the most painful, the most pure, because that kiss we didn't share taught me more about love than any that ever came after. And maybe that's why I still dream of him, of that suspended moment, of that wartime love that refused to be consumed, just so it could survive inside me. I don't know if you've ever felt your heart drop all the way to your knees. But that's exactly how I felt when I found out about his transfer. Isaac was going to be sent to the front lines. He had 2 days left, and he didn't even know yet. I found out first. The names were read from an internal bulletin, the kind commanders drop like a hammer. I only read it once, but that name, Isaac J. Mallory, burned itself into me like a sentence. I stood in front of that list for way too long. The paper shook in my hand, but I told myself it was just the cold. A lie. It was terror. The kind of fear only someone who's loved without being able to protect can understand. The kind of fear that comes when someone else's life starts mattering more than your own. I knew what the front lines meant. No one came back the same from there. Some didn't come back at all. And Isaac, even strong, even smart, was too good of a man. And good men. War tends to take those first. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I paced back and forth through the infirmary like a restless soul. I heard the rain outside, the muffled prayers of the wounded, the creaking of old wood, and the sound of my own heart telling me I couldn't let this happen. So, I did something no one would expect of me. I wrote a letter, a lie, a carefully stitched invention, woven with just enough truth to sound believable, but not so much it would give me away. I pretended to be his mother. I wrote with my left hand to disguise the handwriting. I used old paper, faded ink, and words I imagined a mother would say. I asked for him to be reassigned, suggested he could help in the rear lines, with medical care. I wrote that she had suffered a minor heart attack, that she needed to know her son was somewhere safe, that his father was aging fast, and if he died out there, their home would lose its last thread of light. I ended it with eternal love, your mother, Agnes Mallory. I signed it with a trembling hand. I slept with that letter tucked against my skin, like a hot secret burning through my clothes. And the next morning I gave it to a sergeant who owed me everything for curing him of a bad infection. He didn't even question it, scanned it, nodded, and promised to deliver it to the decision-makers. I waited. My stomach knotted with guilt and hope. And the next day, the news came. Isaac would not be sent to the front lines. He was being transferred to the auxiliary medical sector, just a few kilometers from where we were. He came to find me. I was in the mess hall, poking at a tasteless soup. He sat down beside me, eyes glassy. He didn't speak for a few seconds, just took deep breaths, like the weight of the world had just been lifted from his shoulders. Then, softly he murmured, "It was her, my mom. She always knew the right time." And he smiled like a boy who'd just been saved from the edge of a cliff. And I smiled back. But inside, a part of me broke. Because to keep him alive, I had to lie. And he never knew. And he never would. It's strange how we beat ourselves up for loving the wrong way, when really we're just loving the only way we can. I didn't have permission, or a place, or a name. But I had words. And with them, I did what I could. I made up a letter, spun a story, forged a mother's love to protect a forbidden love that could never be spoken aloud. Some would call that madness, others a sin. But forgotten heroines don't live to fit someone else's script. We live to keep the pieces we love from being taken by war. And if that takes a lie, then let it be a lie filled with truth. After that day, he started looking at me differently, with more tenderness, more faith. He believed God had heard his prayers, and I, silent, carried the weight of being the answer he never knew he got. That letter, that first lie stitched with affection, became a turning point inside me. After that, I knew we couldn't ever go back to what we might have been, because guilt was now between us, silent, invisible, but present. I had saved his life, but I had buried any chance of truth between us, and still, I'd do it all again, because some loves don't ask permission to exist. They're born out of shock, urgency, and fragility. Wartime loves are like that, intense, quiet, dangerous. And forbidden loves, oh, they're even fiercer, because they have nowhere to rest. They live in hiding, feed off scraps, grow in the shadows, and die the moment they try to see the light. And maybe that's why I still write letters today. Letters I never send. Letters signed with names that aren't mine. Because once, in the middle of chaos, I made up a letter to save a man. And I never stopped writing after that. It wasn't a goodbye, not even a farewell. There was no wave, no hug, just a list, and a name scrawled in black ink, tucked among dozens of others. That's how he left. That's how the war took what was left of my silence. The field hospital was being taken down. Orders had come from the top, as always. The wounded were to be evacuated by ship to different locations. The most critical first, then those considered stable. Finally, the rear personnel. I was in that last group. There was a kind of mechanical rhythm to it all. A sense of urgency pretending not to be fear. Isaac had been transferred a few days earlier to a mobile infirmary near the port. We still saw each other from a distance, exchanged glances, silences, and a kind of presence that said everything without needing to say a word. I knew that place was temporary, and I knew he'd be among the first to board. But knowing didn't prepare my chest for what came next. I arrived at the docks 2 days after the first wounded had departed. I was exhausted. My feet ached like they'd crossed continents. So did my soul. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder, the necklace still hidden in my sock, and asked the officer on duty if there was a list of those who had boarded. He frowned like he couldn't understand why a rear-line nurse would care. But he pointed to a thick notebook, lying open on top of a wooden crate. I flipped through it slowly, fingers trembling, like I was turning the pages of my own life. The names jumped out like ghosts. Last names I had heard between screams of pain, initials scribbled in haste by others like me. And then, there he was. Private Isaac J. Mallory, transferred to Atlanta, Georgia. It felt like getting shot somewhere that doesn't bleed. I don't know how long I stared at that name. Maybe seconds, maybe centuries. The world around me blurred, like I was locked behind glass. Atlanta, a dot on a map, a destination that didn't include me. A new chapter where my name had no place. I memorized the page with my eyes, because I couldn't tear it out, and it was all I'd have from that moment on. 5 words and a city, Atlanta, Georgia. I still repeat it today, like someone chewing on a goodbye they never managed to swallow. I walked back to my quarters in silence. No one asked me anything, and I didn't tell, because what we had never fit into words. And maybe that was for the best. If anyone had known, if anyone had suspected what really existed between me and that calm-eyed, tight-lipped soldier, I would have been reassigned, questioned, maybe even disgraced. But no one knew. Only me. And the cross still pressed to my skin. In the days that followed, I started hearing the word restart a lot. People talked about it like it was a brand new coat. Something you put on to pretend the cold was gone. But anyone who's lived a wartime love knows the cold never really leaves. It settles into your bones, and every attempt to move on is just a poorly stitched disguise. That first night on American soil, far from the hospital, I dreamed of him. Not his voice, not his face, but his name. It hovered in the air like the smoke from a burnt letter. I woke up drenched in sweat, my eyes heavy, and a hollowness that couldn't be explained by longing, only by absence. For years I avoided Atlanta. I had chances. I got invitations. But every time I saw that name on a road sign, a letter, a map, something inside me shrank. It wasn't fear of seeing him. It was fear of seeing him too alive, too married, too far gone, or worse, too dead. Because some things don't survive a reunion. Some loves only live in the maybe, and my love for Isaac was one of them. The last time I saw his name was in that notebook, handwritten, without emotion, without fuss, and still more final than any goodbye I've ever been given. You see, my girl, there are emotional stories that never make it into books, never get a happy ending. There are forbidden loves that don't end in kisses, but in lists, in stamps, in names followed by cities. And there are forgotten heroines like me, who grow old remembering not what was said, but what was never allowed to be spoken. And every time someone mentions Georgia in a casual conversation, the state, the song, the memory, my chest tightens, as if time, that clever thief, drags me back to the moment when my entire world was reduced to a single line in a forgotten notebook. I never had the courage to wear that cross around my neck. The chain he gave me is still with me. Rusted in a few spots, yes, but intact enough to cut through my memory every time I open the box. I kept it in a little metal case that once held suture needles. An old thing, the kind no one uses anymore. But I held onto it like it carried a heart that only beats when it's closed. 60 years. 60 years with that necklace hidden, folded like a secret between layers of fabric, old letters, and a note I read without permission. I never wore it, never showed it, never touched it in front of anyone else. It was my private altar, my reliquary of absence, my silent vow to what we never dared to live. Many times I thought about throwing it away, letting the cross fall into a river or burying it in some forgotten garden. But every time I got close, my fingers refused. And then I'd understand. Not yet. I still couldn't let go of that emotional story burning inside me like an ember, buried under ash. You know what's strange? I was never very religious. I was raised in a messy home, with a kind of faith made more of whispers than sermons. And still, it's his cross that stayed. Not because of what it symbolized, but because of what the gesture meant. Because in the moment he gave me that necklace, he was giving me the only piece of himself he could offer. He knew he couldn't promise me anything. No future, no last name, no recognition. But he could give me the cross. Like he was saying, carry this weight with me, even if no one sees. And I did. For 6 decades. I carried the weight of the choice he never knew he made for me. I never went to Atlanta. I never tried to find him. Not during the years when missing him felt like a fever. Not in the times when loneliness felt heavier than silence. Not because I didn't want to, but because fear was louder. Fear of seeing him happy without me. Fear of seeing him ruined by memories. Fear of finding him dead, with the same cross on his chest, only not mine. Another one, bought on another street, given by another hand. Or worse, fear that he wouldn't remember me. That's the part that haunts us most, sweetheart. The possibility that it was only love for one of us. that one of us kept a relic while the other forgot even the scent. And that risk, that cruel chance, is what keeps so many forgotten heroines like me from reopening the door. So, I was content protecting the only part of him that still lived in me, the necklace. There was a day back in the 70s when I almost lost it. I was cleaning the house, distracted, and the box fell behind a bookshelf. I nearly had a heart attack. I got on my knees for a whole hour, trying to reach it with an old ruler. When I finally got it back, I held it like it was a living body, and I cried. Like I'd just found a missing child. No one ever understood. My kids think that box holds childhood keepsakes. My grandkids never asked. And I like it that way, because that forbidden love is mine, just mine. And what isn't shared stays whole. On rainy nights when the house fills with the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the wind sings like it used to through the old army tents, I open the box. I take out the necklace, hold it in my hands. I don't pray. I never prayed the proper way, but I talk to him, silently, like maybe Isaac can hear me. I don't ask for anything. I don't question. I just say, thank you, for existing, for seeing me, for making me feel that it was possible to be loved, even in a world that always tried to erase women like me. That necklace, my dear, it's the last hug we never gave, the kiss that hung in the air, the letter I lied about, the name on the list. It's all of that and more. It's my vow to a love story that no one would ever hear if I didn't tell it now. A wartime love that survived not on the battlefield, but in the memory of a nurse who only ever wanted to protect a name. And I know many people don't understand this kind of love. Love without touch, without a future, without paperwork. But those are the deepest ones, because they live where no one else can reach. And the pain they leave. Oh, that pain doesn't pass. It settles in, learns to breathe with us. And if we let it, it turns into wisdom. That's why I'm telling this story now. Because the necklace is still here. Because my memory still listens to me. Because time, cruel as it is, still hasn't erased the name I've carried in my chest since that afternoon. The day the cross slipped from his shirt and the world changed forever. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I was 79 years old. My grandkids had invited me to visit a little church they said was too beautiful to pass up. I said yes, half without thinking. Maybe because it had been a while since I'd gone anywhere with them. Or maybe, and this I only understood later, because something inside me needed to go, needed to see, needed to untie a knot. I didn't even remember tying. It was a simple church, somewhere deep in Tennessee. Dark wood, a tall pulpit, stained glass windows that let in golden light so soft it seemed to wash over the pews. And there was music. A youth choir was singing, "Precious Lord, take my hand," and their voices echoed like warm water on an old wound. As soon as I walked in, my eyes filled with tears. No reason. They just did. It felt like that place had been waiting for me all these years. Like those wooden beams already knew my name. I sat in the last pew, alone, and stayed, in silence, with my soul tucked into the corner of my chest. That's when I saw it, that cross, exactly like his, around the neck of a young pastor preaching with such fire, such surrender. It felt like he carried the spirits of every man who ever loved in silence. The cross hung in the same spot, the same dull shine, the same straight edge, as if time had bent backward. I couldn't take it. I closed my eyes, and I cried. Not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies. I cried like old women cry, with the throat, with the shoulders, with the bones. A quiet, clenched sob, the kind that holds the whole world on your eyelashes. The choir's voices blurred into memories. And suddenly, I was back there, in the tent, with him. The smell of ether, the sound of boots, the kiss we didn't share, the letter I forged, the name on the list, the necklace in my sock, all of it came back. I don't know if I prayed right then. Maybe not. I think I just whispered his name. Isaac. For the first time out loud after so many years. I said it with fear and relief, like opening the door to a room that had been locked for far too long. I stayed until the service ended. Then everyone left, and I stayed. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass, and I felt like I was floating between two worlds, the one I lived and the one I never got to live. I knelt on the wooden floor, right there in the last pew, and I spoke to God like I never had before. Not with the words I was taught as a child, but with the words only forbidden love knows how to say. I asked for forgiveness, for lying to save him, for keeping that necklace all these years, for loving in silence. But more than anything, I gave thanks. I thanked him with my whole body. Because even if I was never recognized, never named, never loved in the eyes of the world, I was. I was his nurse. I was his refuge. I was his silence. I was the place where he laid down the weight of the world. And that, my daughter, that's worth more than any altar. I left the church feeling both light and wrecked, like I had cried through every memory I had. My grandkids asked if I was okay. I said yes. And it was true. For the first time in a long time, it was true. That night, back home, I opened the little metal box. The cross was there, as always. I held it in my hands with reverence. But I didn't hide it in my sock. I slept with it on my chest. No fear, no guilt, just love. Because sometimes, loving someone means disappearing from their story, just to make sure they get to live one at all. And even if no one ever knows what I did for him, even if my name never shows up in any book, I was there. I loved. I stayed. And that wartime love that lived inside me for over half a century, that's what kept me alive when the world tried to forget me. These days I wake up startled by the smallest thing. A creak on the porch, a groan from the wood. Sometimes not even that. Just the wind, slipping through the right crack in the window. And for a second that stretches into forever. I swear I hear it. His voice. Or better, the way he used to say my name. That low murmur, like he was calling me into his world, into the silence we built together. But when I open my eyes, there's no one there. Just the curtains swaying, and the kind of emptiness that smells like memory. My grandkids say I talk in my sleep, that sometimes I murmur words in English and Spanish, like I'm living two lives at once. And maybe I am, because inside me live two women, the one who moved on, raised a family, worked hard, grew old, and the one still sitting in that camp chair, hearing a soldier say her name for the first time. Isaac. Sometimes that name slips out, floats off my lips like a leaf in the wind, and yet it lives in me with the stubbornness of things that never die. There's not a night I don't think of him. Not consciously, not on purpose. It's more like a reflex, a corner of the soul that sings by itself, sometimes in the form of a dream, sometimes in the shape of absence, sometimes as a longing that doesn't even hurt anymore. It just pulses, soft and steady, like a candle that refuses to go out. And in those dreams, everything feels different. The field hospital becomes an open meadow. The tents disappear. The smell of iron turns into the smell of wet earth. And he's there, whole. not as the man shaped by war, but as the man he might have become. And in those dreams, sometimes he says my name. Other times he just looks at me. But always, there's peace. The kind of peace we never find in life. The kind only a forbidden love, once turned to legend, can give. I've told you this whole story now, in pieces, in fragments stitched together with care. But there's something I may never be able to put into words. What it's like to live so long, with a name stored in your bones. What it's like to grow old never knowing if he knew, if he remembered, if he dreamed too. Because what was left between us was this, a name whispered in the dark, a kiss we never shared, a letter I faked, a cross I hid, a list in a notebook, a necklace in a box, a church that watched me fall apart, and a dream that keeps coming back, as if the story refuses to end. Sometimes when I wake up and his name slips past my lips, I wonder, what if all of this only lives because it never really happened? What if memory survives not on what we do, but on what we never dared to do? What if our wartime love is eternal, because it was never touched by real time? I don't know, but I suspect some loves can only survive if they grow in absence, if they bloom in the soil of impossibility. Because if they had been real, had faced the world, maybe they would have been crushed or made ordinary. And ours was made to last in silence. So I keep that name, like keeping a relic made of wind. And every time it slips out in a dream, I smile, because I know that, in some way, he keeps me too. He keeps my name, my voice, my absence. And that's enough, because in the end, love isn't what we live, it's what we carry. It's what endures, even when everything else says it shouldn't. And if one day I go, if my body stops being the shelter for this emotional story, I hope someone finds this letter, this confession, this echo of a love that was never allowed to exist. Because some stories shouldn't die with us, some forbidden loves, precisely because they were never lived, deserve to be told. And maybe that's my last request, that you, who listened to me until the end, hear me in your dreams too. And if you ever hear a name whispered for no reason, know that it might be mine, or his, or one of ours. The forgotten heroines who loved in the dark and lived on the margins, but who, even so, carried in their hearts the flame of a wartime love that never went out. Now that you know, maybe I can sleep a little easier tonight. Time doesn't erase everything, you know. Some memories choose to stay. They hide in the smell of rain, in the sound of old hymns, in the pause between one breath and the next. And sometimes, all we need is someone willing to listen, slowly, to the things no one ever asked. These days my life is quiet and slow. I have grandkids who call me stubborn when I forget my sweater, and a rocking chair that creaks just the way I like it. I write letters I never send. I look out the window a lot and I pray. Not like I used to, but in my own way. A way made of memory and gratitude. If you stayed with me this far, thank you. Thank you for listening without judgment, for letting me exist, even if just for a few minutes, inside your time. If this story spoke to any part of you, take care of it. Hold it gently. Or better yet, share it with someone else who also carries heavy silences and names that slip out in dreams. If you ever want to return, I'll be here. And if you can, subscribe to this little corner, so voices like mine are never lost to time again. Until next time, sweetheart, and may you find someone who says your name with truth, even if it's only in a dream.